Arc 5, Stars that Engrave History. Chapter 45, An Inescapable Curse. As Wilhelm spoke the name of a witch he had never heard of before, Subaru shuddered. He only knew about witches aside from Satella from having met the 6 witches of sin in Echidna's tomb. That witches other than those somehow existed was devastating news. Subaru, then, Wilhelm-san, if that Sphinx witch is involved with this raid by the witch cult. Are you saying, other than the archbishops there's another witch too? If so, the main enemies numbered 4 archbishops and 2 warriors. Adding to that a witch joined to their forces made the already difficult power cost for the task become a desperate matter. At Subaru's concerns, Wilhelm, while raising his hand. Wilhelm, pardon me, my wording was unclear. The existence of the witch known as Sphinx perished in the demi-human war. That one could not have been involved in this raid. Subaru, the witch is dead? Is there no mistake? Pretending to be dead, and even after really dying having lots of freedom is the impression I have of witches. Satella was like that. Whenever Subaru violated the taboo it would draw her out, and in the Citadel of Dreams enjoying her afterlife, Echidna was the same. Even hearing they were dead guaranteed nothing at all, that was a witch. Wilhelm, what impression Subaru Dano has of witches I am unaware. But Sphinx is only named a witch, it is merely an existence which was called that. The fact is, the forces of the kingdom referred to it as such, but the concerned party never called itself the same. Subaru, calling them a concerned party. Did Wilhelm-san ever meet them directly? Wilhelm, there were many times during the Civil War. For the end of the demi-human war, the deciding moment may even have been the beheading of the Sphinx. Roswell, Bordeaux, and his wife were leading figures of that time. Subaru, Roswell. An unexpected name popping up caused Subaru to open his eyes wide. At that reaction from Subaru, Wilhelm slightly lowered his head for a moment and became immersed in thought. Wilhelm, I knew the Roswell Dano of 2 generations ago. Although back then I wasn't too friendly, she took care of me. Subaru, 2 generations ago, is that case? Then the name Roswell is inherited from generation to generation. Wilhelm, unfortunately, she passed away soon afterward, and after that I grew distant from them. The current Lord Mathers is only a passing acquaintance, but this is all superfluous talk. He was now lending an ear to tales of surprising relationships, but the original topic was definitely not about that. Subaru nodded his head, and then Wilhelm with, and so continued his tale. Wilhelm, not the Sphinx, but somehow a being using a spell that acts similarly, is my thought. The method of controlling the dead was at the time called cases of corpse soldiers. Subaru, corpse soldiers, that. Does it have anything like weaknesses? Wilhelm, from what I know, the corpse soldier is limited to a technique for moving the body. It is not such that it can bring back abilities possessed in life. It merely shames the dead while keeping the appearance, and actually reflects the skills of the culprit instead. Subaru, but, the 8 arms and... that. He was at a loss for words. The one turned into a corpse soldier whose very death was being profaned was Wilhelm's wife. Nevertheless, at Wilhelm who had accepted it Subaru was speaking of it like he was hesitating. Wilhelm made a bitter face at Subaru's reluctance. Wilhelm, I thank you for your concern. But, it is necessary. My wife and Kurgan's skills are close to how they were in life. It simply exceeds the power corpse soldier can pull out. Subaru, then, isn't possible that this is something other than corpse soldier? If so, then your wife might not even have died. Wilhelm, my wife is dead. Because my strength was lacking. The side hanging onto a fragile hope here was Subaru. That's Subaru's feelings. Wilhelm's clear voice cut down with a single stroke. And the words Subaru could say to that elder swordsman's profile were none at all. Wilhelm, even at the time, that which could not simply be judged as merely a corpse soldier did very rarely exist. Whether it was due to aptitude in the procedure, or if rather another factor I do not know, but we have to consider the strength of those two as such. Subaru, do you have a way to take them down? Wilhelm, thoroughly destroying the body, or cutting away to the curse mark somewhere on the body. Then the corpse soldier will return to a simple corpse. It must be done this way. The deeply thinking Wilhelm's voice could not easily be heard. Searching for what he should do, coming to conclusions with effort he was searching for it. His trembling voice, his clenched fist, his scrunched eyes, he was hiding nothing. Wilhelm, I apologize for holding you this long. Crush-sama cannot be made to wait any longer. Now, this way. Wilhelm bent his back and indicated the door at the room they had come up to. On the innermost part of the 4th floor, with a crumbled plate labeling it as a lounge, was the room. Inside, Crush, who had called Subaru, was waiting. Passing Wilhelm's side, Subaru with the sound of footsteps headed for the door. Definitely, the distance to the door felt awfully long. The soles of his shoes stuck to the floor and interfered with Subaru's progress. That was the impression he got. That it was his defeated self's weakness, Subaru was clearly aware of it. Subaru, it's me. Natsuki Subaru. Is Crush-san? He knocked on the door, and with a voice so quiet he wondered if it reached the other, called out. Like that, after a moment's brief silence, the other side slowly opened the door. The face that appeared was Ferris. But his appearance had changed entirely. Ferris, Subaru-kyun. Red eyes puffed up from crying and disheveled brown hair. Covering his body was, not his, but someone else's blood staining black, and with his white skin splattered he must not have had time to clean. His cheek and neck was also smeared with fresh blood. At that miserable appearance, his breath inadvertently caught in his throat. Subaru, Crush-san called me, I heard. So? Ferris, yeah. Inside, she's on the bed, definitely don't do anything unnecessary please. A firm voice, with some hatred near the end. However, that hate was not directed at Subaru. It could be said to be directed at everything. Hating everyone in this world, rage with nowhere to go was now controlling Ferris. Taking a deep breath, Subaru followed Ferris inside. Even calling it a lounge, it was not a very spacious room. Long tables and chairs were arranged in 2 rows, and further back, the small room was divided by a threshold. The bed was past it. And, on that shabby bed lay her. Crush, Natsuki-sama? The conscious Crush recognized Subaru had entered and called him by name. Reacting to that girl's voice, Subaru's neck grew rigid. Readying himself, feigning calm, calling out assuring words. To be unable to even do something so simple. Crush, my appearance is not presentable. My apologies. Subaru, no, that's not like that. It's not like that. Seeing the frozen appearance of Subaru, Crush apologized in a lethargic voice. At that girl's sorrowful attitude, the shaken Subaru spoke with vague words. Having been drenched in Capella's blood and clothed in its curse, Crush was in a wretched state. Her neck, the back of her hands and feet, over all skin that could be seen dark black and veins shone. It was not difficult to imagine that under the towels and blankets and clothes the skin there would be afflicted with the same. These black blood vessels that pulsed instead of circulating blood, as if a writhing serpent seemed to be strangling the thin Crush's body instead. That formerly white, unblemished skin of hers was now being violated horribly. Of course, the damage was not limited to below the neck. The gallant Crush's clever visage, reminiscent of a long-drawn sword, its left had received disfiguring stains. Compared to that, the right side of her face retained her beauty. That rather emphasized the contrast between the two sides, and made the unfairness of a noble person being defiled more apparent. As if covering the left eye, a patch was hung there, and the sight underneath it was difficult to imagine. Subaru, this is the same curse of dragon's blood as on me? If it was just the same, then that much was not cruel at all. Knowing Crush Karsten, Subaru's worry did not end at that. He looked down at his own right leg. Like Crush's skin, it also was mottled and wrapped with blackened veins. However, Subaru's leg, terrible sight notwithstanding, was otherwise unaffected. Neither pain nor feelings of soreness were felt by him at all. But Crush was definitely different. Her breathing was labored, and whenever the dark veins pulsed, she sighed as if resisting pain. Subaru, Ferris. How is it not cured? He turned to gaze at the greatest healer in the kingdom. However, that Subaru's brief thought only served to hurt Ferris, who was gritting his teeth helplessly, even more. Biting down on his lips, stabbing his own arms with his nails while bowing his head was Ferris. Ferris understood his lack of power and was dismayed by it more than anyone else there. Knowing the relationship between the two, Subaru had no reason to doubt all possible methods beyond his imagination had been exhausted already. Subaru, Crush-san, to me, what is it? Why in such a painful situation had she called out for him? That there was something he could do, he didn't think so. Maybe there was something she wanted to say. To ask for revenge on the lust that had made her this way. Perhaps even some resentful words would be directed towards Subaru. Even if fed insults, even if curses are poured on, he'll accept it all. At Subaru's question, Crush opened her mouth as if it pained her to do so. Lending those lips his whole body, not missing the feeble sigh she gave, he focused and listened. And Crush, unharmed, I'm relieved. Subaru. Crush, the same as me, were cursed too, I heard. Subaru felt a burden lift from her in the softness of her relieved sigh. At the same time, he understood the true feelings in his heart, and he grew so angry at his own stupidity he wanted to die. He had been thinking it would be easier to be criticized. So he had doubted Crush's integrity and cut down in his view her noble heart. And she had just been truly worried that Subaru had been afflicted with the same pain as herself. Subaru, SOR, I'm sorry, Crush-san. Having suspected her feelings, the result of things having been her suffering, being unable to suffer instead on her behalf, in a voice mixed with all those feelings he squeezed out. Without realizing what he was doing, he stretched out his hand and grasped the hands Crush had weakly laid over her stomach. The black blood vessels had no special texture even if touched. That the feel of skin with this ruined of an appearance did not change was even more pitiful. But Crush, foo you. Subaru, goo. The suddenly falling sound of Crush's sigh, and at the same time a pain noise from Subaru's throat overlapped. Agony as if he had grasped a hot iron stabbed into him from his palm. In an instant, Subaru released Crush's hand and stared at the palm the sensation had come from. That blackened erosion was spreading over it. Subaru, WH-at. Ferris, show me, Subaru-kyun. Grasping the groaning and hurt Subaru's hand, Ferris inspected the erosion. The light of healing blanketed the spot, but there was no sign of either the pain or the affliction fading away. Instead, Subaru, Ferris, Crush-san's hand. Ferris, The wide-eyed Subaru's gaze pulled Ferris to where he was looking. And those yellow eyes, seeing the same thing as Subaru, now widened too. Subaru had grasped Crush's left hand on that hand, though slightly, the blackened erosion had thinned. That change, and looking down at his right hand, what was passing through Subaru's mind was, Subaru, no way, it moved from Crush's body to mine, is that it? It could only be thought of like that. The touched hand and the change on his own was directly a plus and a minus. That the light and curse had traveled to Subaru's body from Crush, there was no reason to doubt. Ferris, boo, but I haven't changed at all? I examined Crush-sama's body, I touched her many times since. For me. At Subaru's hypothesis, Ferris shook his head. That was not joy at a possibility for healing being found, but rather an appearance of suspecting that the hypothesis was false. No, his own feelings were definitely different. Ferris, I can't make Crush-sama feel better. Subaru, then let's try it one more time. Pushing aside the taken aback Ferris, Subaru once again stood before Crush. Crush, with a face that was unaware of what had occurred yet was directing glistening eyes at the approaching Subaru. To not show a frozen face for that eye-patch-wearing single-eyed gaze, Subaru took a deep breath. To check it again, this time, he lightly brushed Crush's cheek. Subaru, goo you. Immediately after, Subaru's brain was stabbed. With pain as if magma spilled into his veins. Through the tips of his fingers, the body-violating curse in Crush's body flowed in and burned his senses. Subaru, Gaa. Feeling stabbing pains which were difficult to bear, Subaru loudly screamed and yanked his body away. Like that, falling back with the momentum, the hand which was touching Crush fell away. Subaru, ha. His lungs shivered and his eyeballs cramped. Like a fish on land, parting his lips, Subaru desperately sought oxygen. Ferris, Subaru-kyun, are you okay? Seeing his breathing start to calm, Ferris spoke to Subaru. Barely able to spare enough feeling to notice the hard floor he had landed on, he raised his body with difficulty. And gazing up at the face of Crush lying in bed. Subaru, how is it, Ferris? Was it a little effective? Ferris, With a plop, Ferris, who had confirmed Crush's condition, sat back down again. He too would have seen with his own eyes. The cheek which was eroded by the curse was, from that curse, relieved a little bit. If such treatment was possible, then saving Crush was also. Crush, you can't, Natsuki-sama. To try once more, Subaru rose. However, it was none other than Crush herself that stopped him. Not understanding the meaning of her words, Subaru asked. Subaru, did you not notice? Your hand is. Crush, hand? Hearing this, she looked down at her right hand. And it was then that she finally realized the change that had occurred. Just like the right leg, blackened veins spread over the skin. That much was fine. If it was that much, his resolve to take on Crush's curse would not be shaken. But there was definitely something strange here. Compared to the erosion which had been taken from Crush, the extent was much greater. The erosion on her body, the darkened parts of her left hand and cheek had grown a shade lighter due to Subaru's touch. However, Subaru, who had taken it up onto his right arm from the elbow down to the back of the skin, had been completely covered by the blackened erosion. The degree of it was definitely not comparable at all. The ratio the curse was transferred, it was not 1-to-1. It was more on the level of 10-to-1. Subaru, no, even then. Whether that was cause to hesitate was another matter. There was pain in the moment of transfer. But once it had been accepted onto the body, there was no sign yet that the curse would actually hurt Subaru. Compared to Crush's constant hellish suffering, what Subaru received was but for a moment. There, between man or woman, which side should bear the burden of its torture, there wasn't even any need to consider it. Whether it was his right leg or right hand blackening, if it was for the sake of saving Crush, it didn't matter. Crush, Natsuki-sama, that cannot be. I am unable to accept those feelings. Subaru, don't be silly. It only stings a little, so it's fine. Compared to getting a tattoo, while showing off and regretting it later, let's think about it as dirtying a body that was like that in the first place. I can take away the pain too. It's strange, but it doesn't give me any trouble. So, Crush, can you guarantee that will be true in the future? It could be that both Natsuki-sama and I become unable to fight. In this current situation, that would be a fatal blow. Worrying more for the city and the people than her own body, that was Crush's judgment. It was logically sound, but not everything should be pressed forward with just that. Crush, Ferris, please stop Natsuki-sama. Ferris, I am. Crush, please. Because Natsuki-sama is now one who is needed by others than just myself. Ferris, if Subaru-kyan resolved to help Crush-sama's suffering. The hesitating judgment of Ferris was one which kept Crush first. That nobody could blame him for. None of those present was in the wrong, after all. The notion that whatever is not wrong is right was mistaken. Crush, you must not be overwhelmed by the emotions of a single moment. Natsuki-sama, I ask of you. Subaru, Crush-san, even then I am. Crush, didn't you say so before? What's left, leave it all to me. Subaru, you. Crush's pleading eyes took hold of Subaru and would not let go. Had those reliable words come from his mouth? Hearing that, for Crush to say all that, was she telling him to? Crush, please say that to me as well. Subaru. Crush, all that's left, to leave it all to me. A pained smile was awaiting Subaru's words. Swallowing his breath and shifting his tongue in his dry mouth, Subaru quietly closed his eyes. Without thinking of the future, only immersed in what was in front of him, he was making her say things that didn't need to be said, so at least. Subaru, Crush-san, calmly rest here, please. Crush, Natsuki-sama. Subaru, because everything that's left, you can leave it all to me. Crush, yes. If it was just filling the needed role and saying the desired words, then it just had to be done. Hearing Subaru's reply, Crush took a deep breath and seemed to relax. Her eyelids weakly blinking shut not a moment after proved that, up until now, by any means possible she had been holding on to attentiveness. At that moment, breathing a quiet sigh, Crush once more began her time of battling with the effects of the curse. Subaru, sorry, Ferris. But I have to go now. Ferris, what should is it alright? Draping a towel like a blanket over Crush and standing up, Subaru heard a small voice as he was leaving. It was the first time Subaru had seen Ferris showing weakness. In his innermost thoughts, what he wanted now was to remain at Crush's side. But in the current situation, Ferris' ability would not allow for such a thing. Subaru, I need your strength. I'm not saying to leave City Hall. But if something happens, I'll let them know to evacuate the wounded here. So, I'll leave that to you. Ferris, the one I wanted to save most, and I can't help them. Subaru, Ferris. Ferris, sorry. I said something silly, just give me a moment, please. While looking away, Ferris sat down on a chair next to the bed. Subaru finally lightly patted his shoulder and stepped out of the lounge. Unchanged from when he had entered, Wilhelm remained waiting in the hallway. Wilhelm, thank you very much for considering Crush-sama's feelings. Towards the returning Subaru, Wilhelm said this. Did what happened within leak out outside, or perhaps Subaru's expression was just easy to read? Subaru, it isn't some noble tale like I considered her feelings. Since it's more a story of how I was encouraged, my body, what's up with it anyway? Taking on Crush's curse, and its effect being weakened against him in the first place. Going back even further, the so-called witch factor and return by death, all of it was really vague. One day, would he get to see their reasons and their end? Subaru, Crush-san will leave it to Ferris. When everything is solved, I'm thinking of trying what I did before once more. Wilhelm, is that right arm all right? Subaru, at first glance it's a bit iffy. If I wore long sleeves and wore gloves it might be okay, for the sake of rescuing a pretty girl, just one scar that doesn't fade away isn't any trouble at all. Even though he had some aversion to it, that was Subaru's true feelings. If there wasn't any other solution, then taking on Crush's curse fully was also fine. Even if his body became pitch black because of it. Amelia, Rem and Beatrice, he would have to beg forgiveness from all of them. Subaru, but that's all talk for after we pass this hurdle and live. Wilhelm-san, let's head down. They're probably talking about the plan to retake the control towers right now. Probably, all the top-class powers that this side could muster would already be gathered there. What followed after would depend on the cooperation and abilities of the Archbishops of Sin, as well as the timing and execution of the plan of attack. From the deadline imposed by the witch cult, only 6 hours were left. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano, regarding that matter I have a request. Subaru, a request? Wilhelm's words stopped Subaru as he headed for the stairs. The elder swordsman nodded his head with the lobby door behind his back, showing concern in his eyes for his mistress within. Wilhelm, if it is possible, please recommend for me the task of subjugating lust. Since I understand well its powers of mutation and super regeneration, I will request this of you. Subaru, is that revenge for Crush-san? Wilhelm, it is so, but beyond that, it is essential to capture lust alive and hear from it about what was done to Crush. For that I will even become a demon. Before cutting off its head, I will definitely pry from it the truth. The killing intent given off by the sword demon felt like a wave of heat to Subaru. Furiously, darkly, having been unable to do anything, Wilhelm's ardor to avenge his mistress now rose up like flames. Subaru, that spirit is fine, but are the corpse soldiers all right? Wilhelm. Subaru, your wife, wouldn't you know her best? No matter what happens, Wilhelm will be needed to make judgments. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano, has Reinhardt arrived below? Wilhelm suddenly interrupted as he spoke of his concerns. Awkwardly, Subaru nodded. Reinhardt's powers could not be left out of the attack. However, that the warriors would be there as obstacles for him was certain. Wilhelm, the true nature of the corpse soldiers, could you avoid speaking of it to Reinhardt? Subaru, huh? The perplexed Subaru was unable to grasp the reason for the abrupt request. Subaru, then, don't tell that guy about Wilhelm's wife, is that what you mean? Wilhelm, yes, it is so. For Reinhardt. For my son, I want to avoid him meeting my wife in the form of a corpse soldier. He will surely blame me. Because the fault is none other than my own. Subaru, Wilhelm-san's fault, to say that kind of thing. It's not true, he wanted to say, but Subaru could not carelessly remark so. Because the image of Heinkel's appearance ruining the mood earlier in the morning had appeared in his mind. There was no credibility. But it could not be denied. Wilhelm considered Reinhardt the cause of his wife's death. And such a difficult and unbelievable past he did not deny. Wilhelm, does Subaru Dano think that the blessing of the Sword Saint is something special? Subaru, honestly speaking, I would say I know little about it. Maybe the people called Sword Saint all had it, and if you have it you become incredibly strong. I only have an impression like that. Wilhelm, to know of it as that isn't wrong. But if there is a difference between the blessing of the Sword Saint and other blessings, is that, it can be inherited. Subaru, an inherited blessing. At Subaru's breath, Wilhelm nodded. The elder swordsman closed his eyes as if recalling sorrowful memories. Wilhelm, that blessing has passed down without fail from the time of Reed Istria. The blessing became the inheritance of the Istria family, and always a member of the clan was chosen to be the next Sword Saint. My wife's blessing definitely passed down to Reinhardt. Subaru, so a blessing that is inherited down the clan, is it, is that so? And when your wife passed away, the blessing transferred to Reinhardt. While understanding that too, something caught in Subaru's head as he was growing convinced. After the Sword Saint was slain by the White Whale, the line of succession led to Reinhardt. It was a sad past, but one that could also be described a proper passing on. That flow did not fit at all with what had been said in the argument between Istrias this morning. Wilhelm's heartbreak, Heinkel's mockery, Reinhardt's silence, was interfering with the idea of a proper succession. And the answer is Wilhelm, it was, at the time of the White Whale subjugation. Subaru, Wilhelm-san. Wilhelm, Reinhardt received the blessing while my wife was in the middle of the expedition against the White Whale. During that conflict, my wife, abandoned by the sword, could only take on the battle as an ordinary woman. That was the truth of the Istria family division. In the midst of the battle to subjugate the White Whale, the blessing had suddenly passed down during the fighting. And on the battlefield, the result was that only the now former Sword Saint remained. Now left a predecessor and an ordinary person, to defend many other soldiers she had still fought with the witch fiend, and they had lost contact with her. Wilhelm, the one that took away the sword from my wife was none other than me. Overruling my wife who was loved by the sword, forcing her to cast it aside, and turning her into an ordinary woman, it was none other than myself. That was what called forth the death of my wife. Subaru. Wilhelm, the sword that my wife betrayed did not forgive her, and so her blessing was taken away on the battlefield. She could rely only on a single blade. I think of how she must have felt then, it was true that I could not accept it, and defamed Reinhardt whom the blessing had chosen. As he was weeping over the death of his grandmother and bearing the heavy new burden, I impetuously could not forgive him. I regret that now. Last night, the regret that Wilhelm had revealed to Subaru it was that mistake. Even knowing that Reinhardt had not done anything wrong, Wilhelm had been mourning his wife's death and was unable to accept it. As a result, the Astrias had split apart. Wilhelm, I do not want to repeat it again. Reinhardt has no blame in my wife's death. I have no reason to blame my grandson at all. And so, instead of revealing it to Reinhardt, he was saying he would bring this to a close himself. That feeling, he now understood painfully well from this talk. If Subaru could do it, he wanted to as well. But the burden Wilhelm bore was too high. Subaru, about Crush-san and your wife, it will be buried there, Wilhelm-san. Even if I don't talk about the corpse soldiers, the question of where they might appear is. Wilhelm, that is definitely a needless worry, Subaru Dano. Subaru, huh? Wilhelm shook his head at Subaru as he was about to point out that it was not certain. And the sword demon spoke as his expression twisted into a fearsome grimace. Wilhelm, because there is no chance of my wife not coming to meet me. Chapter 46, A State of Mind. When going back to the rendezvous point with Wilhelm, everyone had been looking forward to Subaru's return. With Reinhardt looking at Wilhelm, the grandfather welcomed the reunion with his grandchild while pulling his chin. While the two stood together along the wall exchanging sidelong glances, Subaru sat down next to Otto at the round table. Subaru, I'm sorry for being late. How did the negotiations turn out? Otto, we just ended up with the same matters we got from the start. It will surely be better from Natsuki-san's side. How is Crush-sama doing? Subaru, it seems she isn't doing well. However, it's not like we can already say that there is no hope. Once we get to the negotiations after driving out the witch cult, we might be able to do something. Otto, is that so? If that's the case, then that alone is good news. With Otto stroking his chest with a hoe, everyone else having listened to the story also made a similar gesture of relief. While viewing their reactions, deep down, Subaru wanted to give them a heartfelt apology. Although it wasn't a lie, it was a statement which was far removed from reality. There might be a way to save Crush, which would also be considerably risky for Subaru. If her conditions were among the same conditions as Subaru's, he would expect her chances to rise considerably. Subaru, either way, Crush-san's return to the front lines for this battle is impossible. Since it seems that Ferris also doesn't want to be separated from her, I think it would be best if the relief party were to stay behind at the city hall. Additionally, where we'll be meeting, there is the possibility that we will become unable to communicate. Anastasia, that means the plan to attack the 4 places simultaneously hasn't changed. Seems that getting to the location from the city hall in the center is seen from each control tower comes first, right? Then. With a clap, Anastasia looked out over everyone's faces. In that case, shall we finally truly go into the main issue? There are 4 control towers and 4 Sin Archbishops. For the sake of defeating them, we will hold a war strategy meeting. From Crush's faction was the Sword Devil Wilhelm. From Felt's faction was the Sword Saint Reinhard. From Anastasia's faction were the valuable Knight Julius and the leader of the Iron Fang Ricardo. From Emilia's faction were the Spirit Knight Subaru and the Shield of the Sanctuary Garfield. And then, from Priscilla's faction was Priscilla, me and Elle will be together. Subaru, although you said such a thing, will you fight as well? You're a royal selection candidate, aren't you? When each faction's fighters were affirming, Priscilla boldly raised her own name. When Subaru scowled at that, she snorted at him so as to try and scoff at him. Priscilla, I would surely be a candidate for the throne, don't you think? Since the previously important fool has become useless, you've united every last one of the untaken weakling fighters. I stand above everybody both at the sword and on the stage precisely because I am who I am. Wilhelm, now you've become difficult to ignore. With fool, surely you must mean my lord by that? Priscilla, since I have something in mind, just don't stand in my way, I guess. There's a devious expression, old soldier. Through withdrawal by losing a fly to catch a trout and the like, the tales of the chosen cannot be told. From the start of the discussion, Wilhelm and Priscilla already clashed with a dangerous presence. Seemingly habitually ignoring the scene, because of various circumstances Wilhelm's side could not afford to waste time. Since Priscilla's side generally operated in an excessive manner, that also did not leave out hateful language. Anastasia, yeah, let's move the discussions forward, because both the weaklin and the fool stuff is all fine by me. We ain't gonna turn on each other. Priscilla, oh, that's boring. Isn't my obedient listening to the weakling story to a manageable degree? Anastasia, I guess it wasn't like the story was about the victory of the weak? If you do not show the extent of your magnanimity, then nobody will follow you. Everyone is getting equally irritated. Have some patience. Priscilla, humph. As Anastasia's remark was missing its target, Priscilla did not object as she only snorted. As she watched the weapon being pointed at her, Wilhelm, who had been staring daggers at her, had also withdrawn it. Since it was natural that there were disagreements between the factions, he made a serious face. Wilhelm, well then, Priscilla-sama's faction will be Priscilla-sama and altogether, even if your boy cannot expect to be taken into consideration? Priscilla, can something even be done by such a very delicate and weak child? That child has been accompanying me throughout merely for the sake of serving me. Naturally, we will put him aside beforehand. Wilhelm, understood. Then it's been decided that we'll capture the 4 locations with no less than 8 fighters. The boy who was Priscilla's butler Schult, while drooping his head, was exactly evenly split between fighting and not fighting at the round table. Leaving out the names of the 8 combatants, the non-combatants were Anastasia, Schult, Liliana and Otto with Crush and Ferris on the upper floor making 6 people. Anastasia, before we split up our fighting force, shall we go ahead and reaffirm our knowledge of the Sin Archbishops once more? Let's see, the person who has seen all their faces is just Natsuki-kun, right? Subaru, yeah, I think so. Although even I am disgusted with talking about the witch cult's leaders, I will try to get myself to give an explanation. I know about their abilities, though to a certain extent. While gathering everyone's attention, Subaru began to speak about the witch cult which had attacked this city and the horrible Sin Archbishops who controlled it. Subaru, first is Wrath. This Sin Archbishop, who calls herself Sirius, is a fellow who's completely wrapped in bandages. I don't know what she looks like, though I believe she's probably a woman. She attacks using the chains wrapped around her arms. In addition, it seems like she also uses fire magic. Reinhard, if it's only that, then she doesn't seem to be a significant threat. Is she considerably talented? Subaru, if it's said by you, then it's difficult for anyone to answer, Reinhard. If we're talking about simple fighting strength, then Wilhelm or Julius will be able to provide sufficient opposition. Her other abilities seem to be an equal match with Amelia though. Nevertheless, she has the authority of Wrath. Reinhard, an authority. Reinhard frowned to that sound as he brought his hand to his chin. Subaru continued as he nodded back at him. Subaru, the biggest point about a Sin Archbishop's repulsiveness is their characteristic ability called their authority. Being an incomprehensible force which differs from both magic and sorcery, it's useless to even think about how it works. Since every one of them is powerful, defeating the authority will become the crux of defeating a Sin Archbishop. Wilhelm, since Subaru Dano had supposedly defeated Sloth in the past, was that the authority itself? Subaru, it was. The Archbishop of Sloth's authority, the unseen hand, was Sloth's second ability. The authority can grow an unknown number of powerful arms which are not only invisible, but also have incredible strength. If someone were to be caught in them, they could easily completely tear their body apart. Julius, having witnessed them myself, I've also verified their repulsiveness. In practice, it's believable that just by snatching a body its power could gouge out someone's flesh. Julius followed up on Subaru's explanation. During the united front against Betelgeuse, it was Subaru lending his eyes that made him see Betelgeuse's unseen hand. He was in an ideal position to reinforce his explanation. Subaru, moreover, Sloth has the ability to forcefully snatch away the energy of people in his range. Whether this was the authority is difficult to tell, but we overcame it by using spirit art users who were immune to it. This was also because it was me and Julius. Julius, even if we were able to tell whose ability it was, assuming the Sin Archbishop was holding such a terrifying ability, it's not like we would definitely succeed if we were to assign a capable fighter to the right opponent. Subaru, you said an unusually good thing, Julius. It's something like that. When Subaru praised him in his own way, Julius looked at Subaru with a discerning though lukewarm eye. While getting an uncanny feeling from that gaze, Subaru once again clearing his throat continued. Subaru, so, let's go back to the discussion about the authority of Wrath. What we know as of now about Wrath's ability is the sharing and propagation of emotions and senses. Sharing, emotions and senses? Since Subaru's explanation didn't really make sense, most of the discussion members tilted their heads. Because it was difficult to explain, it was necessary for Subaru to choose his words carefully. Subaru, I mean, it's that Wrath is able to unipolarize the emotions of people in its range. It makes one person's anger into everyone's anger and one person's sadness into everyone's sadness. Anastasia, what the heck's that? If that's what it means, then it's simple as to why. Subaru, certainly if it were just that you would just forcefully make yourself use your ability to sense the mood, but it's not like that. The scary part of this ability is when it's able to unipolarize until it reaches hostility. That is, if Wrath is your opponent and directs their hostility towards your perceived companions, it will definitely also be transmitted to the people in the perimeter. Otto, so it turns the townspeople in its perimeter against us? Subaru, exactly. By snapping his fingers, Subaru indicated that Otto had drawn the correct conclusion. Although it gave everyone depressed looks, the problems didn't end with just that. Priscilla, foolish commoner, did you say that wrath or whatever can share emotions and senses some time ago? As the first to finally reach an understanding, Priscilla reclined on her seat, piercing through Subaru with her crimson eyes, while concealing her mouth with her folding fan. Priscilla, if the explanation from just now was about sharing emotions, then sharing senses is again different. And if we then assume that that is just my way of imagining things, is it not a considerably repulsive ability? Subaru, I don't know how you're imagining it, but it's the worst. Wrath's authority shares the wounds of people in its range. This does not exclude Wrath's wounds. Ricardo, if even the person himself ain't no exception, hey, bro, that ain't true, innit? Ain't that the worst? In other words, wouldn't other fellas die if Wrath were to be killed? He had already once realized that terrible scene in practice by Reinhardt's hand. Even if they crushed Sirius, who was the source of the malice, that act alone would inflict permanent wounds to the people surrounding them. They wouldn't know if anyone dragged into the fight would be fine if they managed to kill her. Priscilla, interesting. To this hopeless information, everyone held their tongue without coming up with countermeasures. In such amidst just one person, only Priscilla was cheerfully warping her cheek into a sneer. Priscilla, very well. I will give that Wrath fool a picking. You're free to rejoice. Subaru, well, wait up. Although I don't know why you're so eager, it's not something you can take so lightly. Were you listening to what I said? Priscilla, let's settle that I was listening. Thus upon having listened to that, I have declared that I will go. They are indeed a disgusting opponent with cowardly methods, so it's appropriate for me to cut them down. Without even listening to Subaru's attempts to stop her, Priscilla looked over everyone while folding her fan to make a sound. With that sharp gaze and zeal, she overwhelmed even strongest fighters present. Priscilla, if you've said everything about the authority, then there is a verse that comes to mind about those Karakuri. Wanting to be accompanied by the same masses who disregard you, and the like is impertinent. The vulgar masses exist entirely for my sake. If some insolent worm turns their hand to me, I immediately throw them out of my garden. Princess. Aren't you bragging even a little too much? Priscilla, what kind of foolishness are you saying, Al? Knowing your cowardice, what is it about that you get cold feet from the insolent opponent who sours my mood? With me, there is no point in being afraid if the singer is there. Al, it's not like I'm saying it because there's nothing to be afraid. Singer? When Al tried to stop his master's irrational behavior, he stopped as he heard an unexpected word. While generously nodding at her follower's surprise, Priscilla pointed with her folded fan at Liliana, who sat at the corner of the round table. As she suddenly became the topic of the discussion, Liliana opened her eyes wide at the fan that was thrust before her. Liliana, did mean me with that name. Why are you doing that so suddenly and neglectfully again? Priscilla, you must be forgetting about your travels? How long your songs have shaken the hearts of the masses. You should do the same thing with that. In short, you should fight for the emotions of the vulgar masses and such. Liliana, seems like I was making you anxious just because I raised my voice a little? You might say that under no circumstances you are overestimating me too much, but pressuring a weak young girl like me. Priscilla, oh? So, if it's your choice, you allow the song you inherited from your ancestors to be defeated? As Priscilla snorted, Liliana's facial expression changed to Priscilla's words, which sounded like she despised her wholeheartedly. Showing a forced smile, she wore a facial expression with an earnest charm, as she menially tried to ward it off. Liliana, that is, what do you mean? Priscilla, it seems like it even if you do not think so. Does your song, which has been passed down so zealously, seem like it is being sung when the hearts of the people, which are begging for help, are exposing their sometimes unsightly cowering? That kind of loser's whining, is that not all a bunch of idle futility? Even a dog's barking is still better than insisting on being selfish. There, how is it sinking in? It's like the praise of a loser. Liliana, you're going so far as to say it. Are you blurting it out? Fine. I'll go. I've understood all right. Catching me, the minstrel Liliana, like that. Using such language. A woman will become obsolete with this silence. Even the late Kiritaka-san will come crawling out of his grave with regret like this. Because of Priscilla's fierce provocation, Liliana became excited as she intensely exploded back at her. With her face becoming a bright red, she violently strummed the musical instrument placed on top of her lap. Liliana, stop it if you were thinking about letting even a requiem be sung to comfort Kiritaka-san's soul who pitiably fell into the city's waters. I'm a scramble of emotions? Bring it on. I, the person who has come to inherit the song, and my song, which has dazed the people of the world, will we lose to an unknown power due to something like that? We don't know the song's power after all. Grr. Schult and Otto hurriedly dragged down the thoroughly excited Liliana, who was performing while lying sprawled on top of the round table. Taking a distant view to the corner of the room where Liliana, who started playing, was held down, Subaru had shifted his focus to Priscilla. Subaru, her manageability aside, you seem sure of her success. But even if you're right, to just throw her into this when you don't know her chances. Priscilla, I am not planning to lose or anything. Everything in this world will be made to my liking. Besides, it is because I was together with that singer that I have come so far as to this city hall. After taking her around with me precisely because I recognized that singer's usefulness, I have again decided to take her with me. Subaru, are you saying that Liliana is an opposing force to Sirius? Priscilla, it would be my defeat if it were not for that singer. And something like my defeat is impossible in this world. Therefore, it is because of that singer. Need I explain this any further? Because none of the insufficient explanations were feasible, it steadily became unbearable for Subaru. However, it was Schult who raised his hand instead, who tried to follow up on Priscilla's remarks. The butler boy's adorable eyes quivered as he chose his words with utmost care. Schult, well. I think that it's true that Liliana's song has a special power. It's true that they were released from anxiety or irritation when they listened to Liliana-sama's song. That is also what we learned from several refuge shelters which we passed by before we came here. Subaru, you were letting Liliana sing to the refuge shelters you were visiting? Priscilla, I believe I said so. Subaru, you didn't say that. Even the insufficiency of her explanation was excessive. While being troubled by Priscilla's attitude, Subaru turned his head to Reinhard. Subaru, hey, Reinhard. Do you know of an innate ability that can see people's, or rather? Alright, they're divine protections. Can't such things like divine protections be seen? Reinhard, I think there's a divine protection which learns about people's divine protections. I've heard that the owner of the divine protection of judgment can see them. They aren't in Lugunica but in Wallachia, aren't they? I see, so we want to check what kind of divine protection Liliana-sama has? It will certainly become one of our main questions. When he understood the purpose of Subaru's question, Reinhard went deep into thought. Since he just tried to ask because he had nothing to lose, even he knew that he had asked something unreasonable from Reinhard. Subaru shook his head to the pondering red-haired youth and said, never mind. Subaru, although I strangely expected something since you said that you heard all kinds of incredible things, it's not like you'd be convenient to that extent. It's fine. For now, we'll be able to cancel Wrath's authority somehow with Liliana's song after testing it a little. Reinhard, you don't need to worry about it, Subaru. I've received it now. Subaru, ha! Patting the shoulder of Subaru, who tried to propose an experiment with Liliana's song, Reinhard smiled. After that, while narrowing his blue eyes, he gazed at Liliana, who was performing in the corner of the room. And then, Reinhard, I was surprised. Liliana holds the divine protection of telepathy. Subaru, I was surprised by you because of the divine protection from just now. Eh? What did you say just now? Did you say that you received it? What did you receive, the treasure that is children? Reinhard, Subaru, it's not a situation to be making fun of. I have been able to confirm Liliana-sama's divine protection. The divine protection of telepathy is, so to speak, a divine protection which transmits the owner's thought to others. It's a divine protection which primarily just transmits trivial thoughts to companions whom the owner shares a close bond with, but, a song, huh? I hadn't even thought of something like that. While Reinhard was honestly admiring Liliana, Subaru's jaw dropped after seeing him with such a face from his side. Since Reinhard's power was already a cheat, this guy, who was said to be beyond superhuman, was being loved way too much by the gods. The divine protection he needed, that divine protection which he thought of turned up in his possession or something if he wished for it. Subaru? Barely managing to reach even a thought, Subaru picked up on what happened. He could acquire a divine protection he thought of if he wished for it. At least it could only be expressed with what happened to the present Reinhard himself. Though that in and of itself was an extremely and reassuringly enviable power. Since it seemed likely that he was mistaken about something, Subaru did not finish his remark. The members of the Wrath capture group were decided: Priscilla, Al and Liliana. Chapter 47, Recapturing the City Outpost. Subaru, first, let's leave the work of dealing with Wrath to Priscilla's team. We have assurance from Reinhardt that Liliana has a blessing. Reinhardt, an unfamiliar blessing may not sound very reassuring. But certainly, if it is Liliana-sama's song, I believe it may be an effective countermeasure for what we've heard about Wrath. Following Subaru and Reinhardt's remarks, the gazes of the round table participants turned to Liliana. She was playing with her braid, and while holding it under her nose, she was play-acting as if it was a beard. Liliana, please leave it to me. This Liliana, once she gets a request, she definitely gets the work done. Rest assured, I only sing in a place where my singing is desired. And if wanted, I trill. Isn't this such a happy thing? If I could even get some tips, then that's time to throw up my arms and celebrate. Subaru, something like a tip won't be coming out of this, so first quit with the capitalist pig talk. Liliana, boo-hi? The excited Liliana deflated, and now Priscilla let out a snort instead. With eyes like red flames, she turned to inspect Subaru and Reinhardt in turn. Priscilla, seeing two boys gossiping in whispers, I looked into what they were plotting, but it seems they are merely wasting their energy on a useless consultation. That singer's worth by mine own self has already been confirmed. I will deign to crush this mere fanatic fool. Subaru, even saying that, to be certain it's necessary to check. Priscilla, how amusing. A singer is one who stakes their life on singing. This singer who ran her mouth, why would she take on some uncertain danger to her life? To take that kind of risk, there is just no point. Subaru. Saying those words didn't leave Subaru much to reply with. In truth, the one that suggested using Liliana, and believing it enough to face off against Wrath was Priscilla herself. Unlike her words and attitude, her prudence and cleverness were exceptional and already well known. Al, princess, don't be both and bro too much. Let's just stay quiet, us two. Priscilla, what's that, Al? Worm, are your thoughts and your views still crooked? You've aged quite enough as a man, but still just act like a girl, I see. Do not lower your worth bit by bit even further in front of these commoners. Al, it's not like that. Turning away his gaze with a swish, Al rested his chin on his right arm and entered a complete observer mode. Priscilla also gave a snort and got off his back about it. Finally, it seemed like the story could flow into the next part now. Subaru, and with that, the attack on Wrath will be left to Priscilla's team. For the others, it's about lust. About who to handle that one, I would like to nominate Wilhelm-san for the assignment. Julius, nominating Wilhelm-sama? May I ask about the meaning of that? Wilhelm, I have humbly requested as much from Subaru Dano, Julius Dano. Towards the wondering Julius, Wilhelm raised his hand and answered. The elder swordsman collected his gaze and lightly shifted it upstairs. Wilhelm, as you all well know, my mistress Crush-sama is suffering still under the effects of the witch lust's cruel power. I am under obligation to fight for my mistress as Crush-sama's servant. This is also a wish of mine that goes beyond my sense of duty. Anastasia, if possible, you want to capture the Sin Archbishop alive, and ask him about those symptoms. Wilhelm-san's motive must be something like that. Wilhelm, as you say, and for that, if the subjugation of lust could be left to me? Those blue eyes with strong will behind them, gave off a darkness which pressured the room. Wilhelm's deeply held determination, and his righteousness towards his mistress with eyes that showed those feelings, nobody could raise half-hearted words against it. Except only, of his own flesh and blood. Reinhardt, in truth, I am opposed to it. Wilhelm, Reinhardt. While everyone was overwhelmed by the swordsman, only Reinhardt's expression did not change. Staring at Wilhelm with his usual serious expression. Reinhardt, currently grandfather, has lost his composure. Of course, to feel hostility towards the Sin Archbishop who harmed Crush-sama is understandable. However, I do not believe that you will be able to achieve the objective with that feeling. Wilhelm, losing your calm is a distraction from achieving the objective? Is that what you are saying to me? Reinhardt, considering Crush-sama, the failure to capture lust is not forgivable. Therefore, I will take on that task. At least, I will be able to face that side with a better mental state. Reinhardt's words were correct and formed with sound logic that considered possible situations to ensure as much certainty as possible. That Wilhelm was being too forceful and was losing his composure was not incorrect. But when Reinhardt gave that opinion, Wilhelm loosened his lips. Surely not gently, but instead with a smile like a wild beast's. Wilhelm, losing calmness here is a given, Reinhardt. Reinhardt, nevertheless, grandfather. Wilhelm, just who are you thinking your grandfather is? I am the sword demon Wilhelm. Giving my effort all to live as just a sword, but unable to stop myself from coming to love a woman too, only half. Though in my method of existence I only came halfway, in the end, for what needed to be done, I have never let it stay unfinished. A fierce smile came over Wilhelm's clear and mild impression. It now reminded one of blood and iron and life burning with flame, the ghost of one whose daylight feelings were taken away. Wilhelm, when I decide to wield the sword, my heart is uplifted. Even not being calm on the battlefield, it is all the same to me. That is how I have lived on to this age. This time also, I have no intention of rotting away without repaying my obligation to my mistress in full. Your pointless worry is not necessary. Reinhardt, that reasoning is not just that mentality. Wilhelm, a mentality held to the end becomes certainty. Even if it takes 14 years, even what some may call a blunted sword will fulfill my vengeance on my wife's enemies. If, by the white whale fight, Wilhelm said his revenge for his grandmother was paid in full, Reinhardt could not say anything more to that. But even then, Reinhardt was lowering his eyes unconvinced. At the obstinate posture of his grandson, Wilhelm with besides. Continued on. Wilhelm, the battlefield which needs you is not here. The scene you are needed in is elsewhere. Reinhardt, the scene I am needed in. Wilhelm, Subaru Dano. My grandson, please take him with you to your battlefield. To rescue Emilia-sama, you will need to battle greed. This Reinhardt would act as a sword for you. Suddenly having his name called, Subaru opened his eyes wide. As if pulled along by the nodding Wilhelm, Reinhardt's gaze also turned to him. At that appearance, Subaru scratched his head as if thinking it can't he helped. Subaru, honestly, I wanted to wait to say this until after the talk of lust was sorted out, yeah. Your power is frankly, something I want to borrow for the fight against greed I'm in charge of. For that annoying fucker, I definitely think I'll need your strength. Regulus of greed floated into his mind. According to his fragmented knowledge of the Sin Archbishop abilities, the power Regulus possessed was the most dangerous of them all, unless the target was a crowd. Though he could not say for sure, in the current situation, he could not imagine calling it by anything other than a stupid word like invincible. Of course, he did not want to think of him as a simply invincible existence. Some kind of weakness or limit had to exist, that was what he wanted to believe, but... Subaru, to break through the invincible protection of Regulus, to fight that guy we need strong attacking ability. His offensive and defensive ability, simply compared with the Sin Archbishops, I think is at the top. So I want to borrow Reinhardt's power for when we attack him. Reinhardt, an untouchable opponent. Certainly, for a monster such as that, I would be the right choice. However, even after hearing of Regulus' absurd power, Reinhardt's hesitation did not disappear. But seeing Reinhardt's worrying, another voice rang out. That sound was coming from none other than the one next to Subaru. Then, Wilhelm Gramps will just be going with my amazing self. Striding forward was Garfield, gnashing his sharp fangs as he glared at Reinhardt. Reinhardt was making a surprised face at him, as if wondering, you are? Garfield, the captain is proposing you. Your skills, my amazing self knows about that too. For rescuing Emilia-sama, my amazing self is not needed then. Right, captain? Subaru, no, Garfield. For me, even if it's like that I don't want to just tell that to you. Garfield, I don't need comfortin'. And I'm not saying this stuff just cause I'm sulkin'. It's the other way around. For my amazing self, this time there's another bastard that needs seeing to hear. His brows furrowing at the roughly breathing Garfield's attitude, Subaru realized too late. That was it. Among those whose appearances had been changed by lust during the City Hall recapture, there had been a person who was like a friend to him turned into a black dragon. Such a person had existed then. Then, for Garfield, lust was not just an unrelated opponent. Besides, Garfield, it's true that we can't forgive that damn woman, but it's not just that. When we fought against that second one, it was where lust was last time. Subaru. Garfield, cause of my amazing self's mistake, there's an idiot that got injured without needin' to there. So my amazing self, I have to give as good as they got fair that one. And so, my amazing self will be following Gramps over there. At Garfield's keen gaze, Wilhelm slowly lowered his chin. Here, the elder swordsman and the young warrior both were united together in a fight for vengeance. At the root, they both shared motives born of thinking strongly about women they care about, so they had even more in common. Towards Garfield's expression, Subaru too had nothing more to say. Subaru, I might be repeating myself here, but lust's power is variation and change. She alters herself and can also force mutations onto others. And her blood. No matter what, do not let her blood touch you. It's what caused Crushsand's injuries. Personality-wise, they're all terrible, but she's especially bad. Wilhelm, understood. Garfield, stomp on M and crush M. At Subaru's last confirmation, neither Wilhelm nor Garfield showed any sign of backing down. When Subaru finally made eye contact with Reinhardt to check what he thought, the sword saint who had been firm up to this resolute scene seemed to have lost the desire to speak. Reinhardt, it does not matter. Garfield's ability is certain. And if grandfather is there, then by whatever means necessary, he will cut them down, that can be relied on. Garfield, you sayin' it like that, s unconvincin'. S like, the tortoise mild but s tastes superb. Reinhardt, it is the truth. Your and grandfather's victory, I believe in it. I will act as Subaru's sword. As Garfield scratched his face with an uncomfortable look, Reinhardt nodded his head at Subaru. From the Sword Saint's believable words, Subaru felt like he had earned a lot of help. Subaru, I'm sorry about this selfish desire, Reinhardt. Reinhardt, it is fine. No matter where the battlefield is, I will give my utmost efforts. If that will be of help to you, then that is what I wished for. Subaru, for just relying on you, I'm really sorry. The situation is, I'm relying too much on you being really strong. The parts where you're lacking, I'll fill them in somehow, so please look forward to it. Reinhardt. Hearing those words, Reinhardt suddenly widened his eyes and shut his mouth. Subaru tilted his head at the rarely seen reaction, and Reinhardt right away with a no, laughed a bit. Reinhardt, for you, that would be nothing at all. I will look forward to it. You filling in for me, the parts one cannot reach. Subaru? Then, look forward to it a lot. So, I think we know the flow by now, but inevitably there's gluttony, the last one. Julius, then, me and Ricardo, are left to be in charge of that. Following after Subaru's words, the one agreeing in a low voice was Julius. Hearing him speak in a rough voice which was unlike him, Anastasia directed a concerned gaze at the knight. Anastasia, Julius, you alright? Since before, your complexion isn't looking so good. Julius, I apologize for causing you anxiety. However, I am fine. When speaking of comforts and discomforts of the body, I cannot make something like weak complaints in front of Subaru. Subaru, what do you mean by that? Julius, of course, I was thinking of your difficulties with your leg when I spoke. Please do not snap at me like that. In a situation like this, I have no intention of getting into arguments with you. Subaru, moo. He took a lot of damage from a motive that he hadn't thought of. At the same time, he felt a strange sense of something being out of place. Julius' appearance seemed suspicious to him just as it had been for Anastasia. Why that was, he still didn't know, but even then. Julius, Ricardo and I will be taking the leftover responsibility of handling gluttony. Originally, Subaru and Wilhelm Sama would have served as his opponent. Due to their ties with him, they would have wanted to manage it themselves. Because you assigned this task to us while enduring those feelings, we will definitely carry it out for both of you to see. Subaru, it's like that. What Julius felt was, Subaru would have wanted to subjugate gluttony himself. Wilhelm would too, and above them now the still-suffering Crush would have felt the same. By the memory-eating, name-consuming gluttony's authority, thinking of the still-sleeping REM who had suffered that damage, Subaru wanted to crush gluttony completely with his own hand. Hitting, kicking, stomping on him, forcing him to regret the atrocities he has committed, to turn his face into a tearing mess as he forced him to bow down to the ground until he felt catharsis, that was what he wanted to do. That role, he had given over to others. Subaru, no matter who it is, honestly, I don't want to leave it to them. REM. I wanted to restore her. I wanted to get her back myself. I believed that doing that was my role. Julius. Subaru, but if it won't do unless I entrust it to someone, then I'll leave it to you. Don't get the wrong idea. It's the process of elimination. That it's by process of elimination there's no doubt, but I will leave it to you. For me, you're the only one I can tolerate handing this role to, even if I don't like it. Rem's very memory and existence was being held hostage. Emilia's freedom had been taken away, and she was still waiting for help to come. Both of them were precious relations to Subaru, both of them were precious people he had to get back, and so to both of them Subaru wanted to show them his cool side. However, Subaru was Emilia's knight and Rem's hero too, so. Subaru, I will topple greed and I will rescue Emilia. Blowing away gluttony, I'll hand it to you, don't screw it up. Julius, to your expectations, I will respond. Especially this time, definitely this time. With a firm nod, Julius accepted Subaru's yielding. The knight called the greatest, then gazed towards Wilhelm, and inclined his head slightly. Julius, Wilhelm Sama. Wilhelm, of what I wanted to say, Subaru Dano has spoken most of that for me. It is true that I do not have the most harmonious feelings for gluttony, and so too, I will entrust it to Julius Dano. There are too many scoundrels caught up in this. From that sword demon growing sharp, Julius seemed to gain a bit of courage. Ricardo, who had until then quietly observed their talk, now said. Ricardo, and what's this? My thoughts don't even seem to be heard in this talk going on. I don't even get to be cared that much, that it. Now that this lineup so far is the best, I can agree to that. Anastasia, Ricardo really is wanting attention. Getting miffed like that with your big size doesn't really look cute, you know, Julius, I will ask of you. Ricardo, relax. Have you ever seen me lying? Annabo. Anastasia, using that title, could you rightly stop that? I'm Ricardo's mistress, you know. Ricardo guffawed loudly at the sight of Anastasia's miffed face and puffed up cheeks. The black iris eyes that gazed down on Anastasia had a very kind glint in them. Subaru, then, with this, the lineups are decided, right? Following Subaru's remark, all those present at the round table nodded their heads. Subaru, for the attack on Sirius of Raph, Priscilla and Al. Counting Liliana, that's 3 in all. Priscilla, the notion that mine self may succumb to the toying of emotions is a laughable one indeed. Showing mine opponent how they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, while facing the wrong enemy, such a helpless fool deserves a lesson. Liliana, I only sing, it's what I am, just a lump of meat that sings. Do not cherish your life, cherish the stage. Okay, good, I feel like I can do it. Right now, I really feel like I can do it. Subaru. Priscilla fanned herself as Liliana engaged in questionable self-hypnosis. Al's face could not be seen, but the impression that he was still not convinced seemed to come from his whole body. Though it was a mildly unsettling trio, confidence-wise they were the strongest there. Subaru, next up, for the capturing of Lust, Garfield and Wilhelm Sand. Garfield, got it. My amazing self will grab M by the throat, and make him cry, and say sorry. Wilhelm, please leave it to me. With the both of us, it is assured. The pair with the most fighting spirit, could it be said to be these two? The sword demon Wilhelm had his mistress obligation, and also his wife, who he could not forget even for a moment. As for Garfield, there was some form inside him that could not be grasped, some emotion that made his feelings shake. Perhaps these two warriors both sought some answers in the battle ahead, he couldn't be sure if that's how they felt. Subaru, and for the conquest of gluttony, it's the two of you, Julius and Ricardo. Julius, by none other than you both, we have been entrusted this task. It will certainly be resolved. Like this, then, I will negate him. Ricardo, my family, those damn bastards made him suffer. I don't need to hear those words to know. I'll punch him, hit him hard and make him cry. This pair had the least connections to the witch cult. And yet they could safely be expected to not fall behind the others, since it was definitely certain that both were highly respected opponents. Together, he had already overcome hardship with them. Nowhere in these comrades in arms lay any cause for doubt. Because of that, the choice to yield the detestable gluttony was made possible. Subaru, the last one is greed, with Reinhardt and I making 2. I'm counting on you? Reinhardt, leave it to me. I am depending on you as well, Subaru. At Subaru's request, Reinhardt nodded his head with his usual resolute attitude. But something in his draped mien seemed soft, and while in the middle of battle it may strike one as insincere, but now his appearance seemed to overflow with humanity. Why it was such a reassuring look, Subaru could not know. Anastasia, then, with this, the choices for the fights are decided. And on the matter of choosing places to set up communication mirrors for reports, there are 3 of them in all. Assuming I leave one in City Hall, for the others left, what should we do? Subaru, personally, I definitely want someone to take one for Raph. And one too. Lust or Gluttony, one of those 2 would be nice, I think. What are your reasons? Subaru, Raph is someone with influence over the whole city. By whether they fall or not, the situation that befalls the city will be changed. Therefore, that news is something I want to be able to share quickly. Regarding the use of communication mirrors, they all nodded as if Subaru's suggestion was the truth. As for the reason for bringing a different one to Greed. Subaru, it doesn't really need to be said, but Reinhardt will be with Greed. Assuming anything more about Greed than his power being unknown is optimistic, but I can't say that the possibility of it being handled instantly doesn't exist. If it becomes like that, I want to set up a situation where Reinhardt can be sent as reinforcements. Otto, however, unless the team at Greed possesses a communication mirror, then sharing that information is impossible, is it not? But I certainly believe that Natsuki-san's opinion is largely correct. Subaru, the answer to that is simple. Use the broadcast magic device. With a citywide broadcast, I want us to keep everyone informed of places that need help. Using the communication mirror, Anastasia-san will organize all the information, and will take on the responsibility of conveying it to everyone. How's that? Anastasia, I'm thinking that's wise. Your head seems to work well sometimes, Natsuki-kun. Anastasia laughed with an impressed look, and tossed a communication mirror at Priscilla. Priscilla caught it with her fan, and rolled it in front of Liliana. Liliana, wah wah wah. Priscilla, singer, you take it. Since mine self cannot lift anything heavier than tableware. Liliana, that fan, it's almost as heavy as some dishes. Don't say pompous things. Priscilla, do not speak so foolishly, inspect this design. Gold is hung and inlaid from it luxuriously, and from just that it is weighty. Do not toss it in with the likes of dishes. Liliana, isn't that heavier than the dishes? Regardless of what she said, in the end Liliana wound up taking it. Ignoring Liliana, who was quickly fixing her hair in the mirror, the last communication mirror was passed to Wilhelm. Subaru, considering the number of enemies, the lust side will need a mirror more than the group for gluttony. 2 people will be fine, I'm thinking, but contact Anastasia right away if it seems dangerous. Wilhelm, understood, I will be sure to contact her. Showing consideration for Julius, Wilhelm placed the mirror in his breast pocket. However, it was a slightly worrying judgment. As it is, Wilhelm could become hot with fury and ignore the instructions from now. And Garfield, needless to say, was the type to explode at the slightest provocation. Regardless, like this the battle preparations were complete. Subaru, I'll leave, a little more time. When that ends we will start, the control tower's recapture operation commences. At Subaru's words, all present replied by nodding their heads. However, seeing their quiet, tense appearances, Subaru thought the mood was bad anyhow. Subaru, if you're making angry faces, don't you get the feeling that bad stuff gets closer? Otto, once more a sign that Natsuki-san will say something strange occurred. Subaru, it's not weird. It's important. No matter how large of an army gathers, if morale is low, it can turn into a rabble. I'm not saying our morale is low here, but I don't think my motives are bad. So, let's raise our voice. While clapping his hands, Subaru stood up. Subaru, let's clean it all up, everyone. With this fight, get rid of the city disturbing bastards. The witch cult fails and we get a happy end. Others. At Subaru's urging, they looked at each other's faces. Then, nodding. Others, who? Like that, a high morale reply came back. If they can give such a strong answer, then they'll definitely be fine. This many members, this much of a vanguard, it wasn't something that could just be prepared again. The city recapture began in earnest. Subaru, this fight is our victory. With Subaru saying whatever he wanted, the roundtable meeting concluded. Sometime later, her muffled sensations recovering, her consciousness slowly returned to reality. As reality started to permeate through drowsy senses, the feelings in her hands and feet naturally returned. Then, while feeling spread through the rest of her body, her first sensation was of something soft embracing her. Warm, it was relaxing like a large animal's fur had wrapped her up. She had felt something similar quite a long time ago. A long time ago, back when she was young, a time when her body could not follow the fairies, a time when she feared sleeping alone. Now far from the feeling of that fur's texture, quite some time had passed since then. Emilia, ah. At first, her eyes welled with tears from its nostalgic touch. Putting aside her silly desire to keep feeling the warmth, she slowly opened her eyes. Her long eyelashes shivered, and amethyst irises blankly noted the world. She was in a room with high ceilings and decoration she had never seen before. Lying on a bed there, she found herself wrapped up in a summer blanket crafted from quality fur. A stranger seated beside her had been cleaning her face with a wet towel. Emilia, you're... Looking down on her when she opened her eyes was a beautiful woman with a pure white face. On the rather sickly, blood-drained face, a pretty and expressionless face like a doll's was attached. Her beauty was such that she would surely light up the room if she smiled, but her face was rigidly held like a mask which could not laugh. Rising, her long hair waving behind her, the woman in a black dress left the room right away. She quickly tried to call out to her, but as she fretted on how to call her, while not knowing her name, the door clicked shut. As such, she found herself alone. Emilia, here, I wonder where that is? Hesitantly, she sat up on the bed. Though she was faintly weary, no pain or signs of poor condition could be felt. The heaviness must be from using too much magic she was not yet used to, as it was a sign that her body was unable to withstand it. Having gotten that far, right away she remembered the rest of what had occurred in her situation. Emilia, right? Ah, at the square, I fought a strange person and... Continuing on, in her head the events from just before she lost consciousness came to mind. A monster with a face wrapped in bandages, the one Subaru had called Wrath, had come for her with fearsome combat prowess and downright creepy amounts of anger. For a moment, she had taken on the fight at an advantage, but then losing to the force of fiercely burning flames, she had been sent flying. Emilia, and then, I must have passed out. But, I'm still alive. As she was outmatched, there was no doubt it had been a desperate situation. Someone had probably come to her aid. Subaru and Beatrice had been there, it could be she was rescued by those two. Even then, her heart was crushed by her own patheticness. Emilia had struck such a pose at Subaru, and had talked really loudly, but not only had she lost, she needed to be helped too. Emilia, MMH, there isn't any time to be dejected. Even if I don't do that, I'm already late to depart, so there isn't time to pause in my steps and repent. I'll repent while walking. Tapping her snow-white cheeks with both hands, she raised her spirits. Time spent depressed was time squandered. Having been provided a bed and blanket, and even being watched over by a caretaker, this place must be a benevolent someone's home. Since she hadn't been taken to her own place, her situation may have been quite severe. Amelia, but I can't feel any pain, so maybe a skilled healer, eh? While moving to stand, Amelia came to realize something about herself. Amelia, I'm naked. At the point bare feet touched the floor, she noticed that not a single piece of cloth was draped on her body. Amelia's head tilting, she first wrapped the blanket around her body and got down from the bed. Gazing around the room, she looked around hoping for something to wear, but regrettably could not find anything. Amelia, what should I do? If I leave the room like this, I'll be thought of as bad-mannered. Before leaving the forest, when she was studying matters on leaving the forest, and learning lots of things from Puck, that point had been energetically enough placed in her head. She shouldn't show skin in front of others. Following that rule, then her own appearance right now was completely a problem. Amelia, but since I'm worried about everyone, it's an emergency so it can't be helped. The battle with the Sin Archbishops, how it had concluded, she had to find out as quickly as possible. With that task as justification, Amelia emerged from the room garbed in a single blanket. Walking out to the corridor, it was definitely not a building she had ever seen before. Just, compared to how she imagined it, the outside of the room gave an oddly unsophisticated impression of a cold hallway. Amelia, I thought I was somewhere like a mansion, but that was totally wrong. Is it just this room that's strange? Turning back, she saw the room where she had slept in. A big bed, and a small wardrobe. However, upon closer inspection, she could not escape the impression that something was unbalanced about it. It gave the impression of a bed and other furniture bought and messily piled inside an empty room. And that might not be wrong. By checking the atmosphere of the corridor, this was definitely not a place meant for people to live in. This was a place where people worked. If she focused her ears, the faint sound of water and a hint of something could be heard. While Amelia puzzled over that there. Ah, it seems you've opened your eyes, how relieving, what a relief. I'm relieved you're safe. Spoken to so, Amelia turned back. Just then, at the far end of the corridor, a young man emerged. Having discovered Amelia, the white-haired youth grinned at her. However, I'm not comfortable with you walking around right after waking. Various things happened and you had a big day, so if there's something with your body it's a headache. That part, I'm telling you to go about your work with certain care. Moreover, since it's not just your body, I mean. Amelia, then, you are. Blinking, Amelia gazed at the young man speaking to her. That attitude of narrowing the gap between others with a single step was somewhat close to Subaru's. However, the crucial difference between Subaru and him was that his attitude had no intention of respecting the other person. That was Subaru's timid virtue, and the young man in front of her did not show any hint of it. It was as if he did not have any remorse for others. At the same time, Amelia was recalling a feeling she could not reveal to the young man in front of her. Is that so? Sorry. I'd even seen your sleeping face, but this is your first time seeing me, I'd say. I haven't even given you my name yet. No matter how you're in a relationship with me, this kind of impolite attitude won't do. I was too hasty on that point, it is my fault. Truly, like I'm sorry, I will apologize. Since I am a human being capable of such things. Amelia, why yes? Amelia's reply to that endlessly, fluently speaking young man was quite heavy. The reason for that may be that his attitude overwhelmed her, but a more significant meaning was contained within. That was, Amelia's subconscious was appealing to her. This young man, somewhere, I remember seeing him before. It's a waste of a scene, it's a shame that this place lacks atmosphere. But I believe this too, when you look back, will think of as a special moment. If you look at it that way, it's not even a bad thing. A small happiness day by day is just more than enough to make the path known as life brighten up. If it's with you, then I definitely especially think so. Not just as being in a bad place, but seeing the nice sides of it, that's the way of life want to try. Do you not think so too, Amelia? Amelia, I do not remember telling you my name, so you are? Oops, sorry. When my feelings get too lofty, without knowing it myself I stop noticing my surroundings, it is a bad habit of mine. It is for that reason that I sometimes dislike my affectionate personality. It could be that you are the one making me feel so deeply. And my name, was it? After an incredibly long and flexible detour, this young man was barely entering the main building. Feeling warning tingles burn her skin, Amelia did not take her eyes off of the young man's actions. That her own safety was at risk, she intuitively understood. And the cause of that intuition was the young man in front of her. Regulus, my name is Regulus Corneas. I hold an executive position in a certain group, but something like that is not important to you. What is indeed important to you is just one thing. That I am your husband, and that you are my 79th wife. Emilia, The young man gave a name what Regulus marvelously spoke of, the meaning of it she did not understand. Emilia fretted, and her pretty brows frowned. But Regulus was not paying Emilia's reaction any mind, and was staring at the body of a girl covered only with a single light cloth. Regulus, that appearance is poison to the eyes. I'll order a change of clothes to be brought over right away. You can relax. They are in the same situation as you, my other wives. Putting on wedding attire is something they would have gotten used to. Emilia, a wedding dress, what do you mean? No, it isn't just that. Calling me your wife, what are you saying? Regulus, right. I was forgetting something important. For one such as myself, that was dangerous. Emilia opened her mouth to ask another question, but Regulus was not listening. He clapped his hands, and lightly grabbed Emilia's shoulder as she was about to ask. As she felt the odd amount of force coming from those fingers, Emilia frowned. Drawing close enough to touch Emilia's forehead, Regulus gazed into her eyes. Regulus, I was forgetting an important question. Your awareness of the wedding comes after this. Emilia, this is important, so I want you to answer carefully. For our future, it's very important. Emilia. At that weird level of pressure, Emilia swallowed her breath and was silent. Taking her attitude as assent, Regulus smiled. With a smile, he asked. Regulus, Emilia, are you a virgin? That's all, it's really important. With a smile, he spoke. End of chapters 45 through 47, Stars Engraving History.